I never believed in Bigfoot myself until that day. But when I found the remains of a missing 6-year-old boy in the stomach of a 9-foot monster, I knew the authorities' story about a tragic accident was a lie. The steam from my coffee curled into the crisp October air, a familiar ghost in the quiet of my kitchen. Outside, the sun was just beginning to touch the tops of the Douglas firs that crowded the edge of my property, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. It was a peaceful morning, the kind I'd grown accustomed to after 30 years of living on the outskirts of civilization in northern Idaho. My name is Arthur Penn, and at 55, my life was measured by the changing seasons and the familiar weight of my hunting rifle. I was not a sport hunter. I was the man the Forest Service called when a problem, grizzly, started getting too comfortable near hiking trails, or a wolf pack began thinning out a rancher's herd. I knew the woods, I knew the animals, and I knew the delicate balance that kept it all from falling into chaos. This life was not for everyone, but it was mine, carved out of the wilderness, one solitary day at a time. I took a slow sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through my chest as I leaned against the worn countertop. My old hound, Buster, thumped his tail against the worn floorboards, his brown eyes fixed on the piece of bacon I was saving for him. He was getting gray around the muzzle, his movements slower than they were a decade ago, but his senses were as sharp as ever. He was good company, a silent witness to a life lived on the fringes. Everything was as it should be. The old clock on the wall ticked its steady rhythm. The floorboards creaked in their familiar places. The scent of pine and damp earth drifted in through the screen door. Predictable. Safe. I tossed the last piece of bacon to Buster, who caught it deftly, and I turned to the sink to rinse my plate. That's when I saw it. My gaze drifted past the window, over the neat stacks of firewood I'd spent the last week splitting and arranging. The ground there was soft, still dark with morning dew, and pressed deep into that damp earth was a single, massive footprint. I froze, the water still running over my hands. It was not a bear. I knew the shape of a bear track like the back of my own hand. This was different. The shape was almost human, but stretched to an impossible size, easily twice the length of my own boot. I could make out 5 distinct toes, broad and splayed, and a defined arch. The sheer depth of the impression spoke of a weight that made my blood run cold. It was too large for a bear, too defined, and it was barefoot. I told myself it was a prank. Some local kids with a carved wooden foot trying to spook the old man in the woods. The thought was a thin blanket, and the cold truth underneath it was that the print was too perfect, the weight distribution too real. No prankster could fake the subtle pressure ridge along the outer edge of the foot or the way the mud had been displaced, squeezed up and out by a force that had to be immense. I spent the rest of the day on edge, a feeling I had not known in years. The familiar routines of my life felt hollow. I cleaned my rifle, a Winchester Model 70 that had been my father's Gotts, the scent of gun oil a small comfort. I broke it down and reassembled it twice, my hands moving with a muscle memory that belied the turmoil in my mind. With every pass of the cleaning rod, I saw that impossible shape in the dirt. I checked my supplies, laying out my gear on the old wooden table: first aid kit, extra ammunition, water purification tablets, a compass that had never failed me. It was the methodical process of a man preparing for the known, but I was girding myself for something that had no place in my world. I could not shake the feeling that a line had been crossed, that the familiar woods I knew so intimately had kept a secret from me, and that secret had just stepped into my yard. Buster was no help. The dog paced restlessly from the door to the window, letting out a low whine every so often. His gaze fixed on the tree line, as if he could see the owner of that footprint standing there in the shadows. The next morning, the unease had solidified into a hard knot of purpose in my gut. I packed for a 3-day trip. I told myself I was just heading out for a routine patrol, checking the game trails for the upcoming elk season. It was a plausible lie. It was the kind of thing I did every autumn. But I was lying to myself. I was not scouting for elk. I was hunting for an explanation. I drove my pickup truck 20 miles down an old, forgotten logging road, the suspension groaning in protest with every pothole and rut. The road was more of a suggestion, a faint scar on the land that the forest was doing its best to heal. The air grew colder as I climbed in elevation. The trees thicker, their massive trunks crowding the path and swallowing the sunlight. By the time I parked, the day had taken on a deep twilight gloom. I left the truck and started my hike, Buster trotting nervously at my heel, his body pressed so close I could feel him tremble. The forest was unnervingly quiet. It was a silence that was more than just a lack of noise. It was an absence. No bird song, no chattering squirrels, not even the buzz of insects. All the small, familiar voices of the woods had been silenced. There was just the crunch of my boots on fallen leaves and the heavy, listening silence. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. We walked for hours, pushing deeper into the wilderness, away from any marked trail. I moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent his life in these woods, but a cold dread was beginning to seep into my bones. This was not my forest anymore. It felt alien, hostile. A few hours in, the smell hit me. It came on the breeze. A faint, sickly sweet taint that made me stop mid-stride. A foul, gut-wrenching stench of decay, so thick it felt like I could taste it on the back of my tongue. Buster whined. A high, thin sound of pure distress, and his hackles raised along his spine. I'd smelled death countless times. I knew the scent of a winter-killed deer, the sharper odor of a predator's kill, the heavy rot of a bear that hadn't made it through hibernation. This was none of those. This was different. Bigger. It was the smell of something immense that had died and been left to rot in the deep, dark woods. An odor so powerful, it seemed to stain the very air. I followed the smell for another half-mile, the stench growing more potent with every step. It was a physical presence in the air, a cloying, greasy film that coated the back of my throat and made my eyes water. Buster, who had been pushing against my leg, finally stopped dead in the trail. He dug his paws into the dirt, his body trembling, and refused to move another inch. A low, continuous growl vibrating in his chest. I knelt and ran a hand down his back, but his muscles were rigid with a terror I had never seen in him. He had faced down bears and mountain lions without this kind of fear. Whatever lay ahead, it was something his animal instinct screamed was fundamentally wrong. I could not force him. I gave him a final pat, stood up, and continued on alone. The silence now amplified by the absence of his panting beside me. The forest seemed to change around me. The trees grew older, their trunks wider than my outstretched arms, their high branches forming a dense canopy that plunged the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. Moss hung from the limbs in long gray beards, and the air grew still and heavy, as if I had walked into a room where the windows had been sealed for 1,000 years. The smell was an overwhelming force now. Guiding me, it led me to a small, secluded clearing, dominated by 2 ancient cedars that rose like the pillars of a forgotten temple. And there, between them, was the source. It was a body, but not of any animal I had ever seen. It lay on its back, a mountain of dark, matted hair, its long, powerful limbs splayed out in a grotesque parody of rest. A thick carpet of black flies rose in a buzzing cloud as I approached, only to settle back down on the colossal form. The scale of it was hard to process. It was easily 9 feet tall, maybe more, its sheer bulk staggering even in its decaying state. The shoulders were impossibly broad, the chest a deep barrel, and the arms were as thick as my thighs, ending in hands that could have palmed a basketball. A Sasquatch. The word echoed in the silent chambers of my mind. A word I had spent my life dismissing as folklore, the stuff of campfire tales and blurry photographs. I had laughed at the stories, chalked them up to misidentified bears and overactive imaginations. Yet here one was, undeniably real and very, very dead. Its existence a brutal fact that shattered the world I thought I knew. I circled the creature, my rifle held tight against my shoulder, my thumb resting on the safety. My hunter's instincts were screaming, but they had no reference for this. It was like a biologist discovering a living dinosaur. Every rule had been broken. The hair was a dark, muddy brown, almost black in places where it was thickest, and matted with pine needles, dirt, and dried fluids. The skin, visible in patches where the hair had sloughed off, was the color of dark leather, thick and tough. I stopped at its head. The face was a nightmarish blend of ape and man, with a heavy brow ridge that jutted out over deep-set, empty sockets. The nose was broad and flat, the mouth hanging slightly open to reveal large, yellowed teeth. Some were sharp, canine-like, but the molars were broad and flat, like a human's. It was the face of something caught between 2 worlds, a thing of myth-made flesh, and I felt a strange, unwelcome pity for it. My mind, struggling to find familiar ground, began to work. Based on the state of decay, the bloating, and the insect activity, I estimated it had been dead for at least a week, maybe 2. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no bullet wounds or claw marks from another predator. It seemed to have just laid down and died. But that was not right. My gaze was drawn to its midsection. It was the abdomen that held my attention, pulling me out of my awe and back into the cold, analytical mindset of a man who understands anatomy. It was grotesquely swollen, distended in a way that decomposition alone could not explain. I'd seen bloated carcasses before. Gases build up, and the body swells uniformly, like a balloon. This was different. It was asymmetrical, lumpy, with a pronounced bulge on the right side. It looked less like it was filled with gas and more as if the creature had swallowed something large and solid before it died. Something that did not belong. Something that its body had not been able to process. The sight of it was deeply unsettling. A final, jarring note in a scene already steeped in the impossible. The quiet of the forest pressed in on me, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the greatest mystery was not the dead creature at my feet, but the secret it was holding inside. A morbid, professional curiosity took over, overriding the fear and awe. I had spent a lifetime reading the stories written in the dirt and the snow, in the entrails of a kill, in the way a tree was scarred by a passing bear. This was just another story, albeit one written in a language I was only just beginning to comprehend. I had field-dressed hundreds of animals, from small deer to massive bull moose and grizzlies that weighed close to 1,000 pounds. I knew what death looked like, inside and out. I understood the processes of decay, the way a body bloats and breaks down, returning to the earth. This was wrong. The unnatural bulge in the creature's abdomen was a question that demanded an answer, a final, grotesque chapter in its life that I felt compelled to read. I unstrapped my pack, my movements slow and deliberate, a stark contrast to the chaos roiling in my gut. I took out my heavy skinning knife, the one with the thick spine and the gut hook, the one I used for grizzlies. Its weight was a familiar comfort in my hand, an anchor in this sea of the impossible. The air was thick with flies, a shimmering black veil that parted for me as I approached. Their buzzing was a constant drone against the profound silence of the forest, the only sound in a world that seemed to have been struck dumb. I knelt beside the colossal form, the damp earth cold through the knees of my pants. The sheer scale of it up close was even more intimidating. I was a child next to a fallen giant. I pulled my bandana from my back pocket, tied it tight over my nose and mouth, and took a shallow breath of the filtered, tainted air. Then I made the first cut. The hide was like leather armor, thick and tough, with none of the give of deer or even bear skin. The blade of my knife, honed to a razor's edge, scraped against it with a horrid sound, struggling to find purchase. I had to put my weight into it, my shoulder muscles straining, driving the point down until it finally broke through with a wet, sucking pop. A wave of gas and an even more horrific stench washed over me, a physical blow that made me recoil, gagging. The bandana was useless against it. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse mixed with something ancient and foul, a smell that spoke of a diet and a biology utterly alien to me. I fought down the urge to vomit, my eyes watering. I had a job to do. I worked methodically, my training taking over where my courage failed. I made a long, deep incision, following the line of the sternum down through the distended belly. The skin and the thick layer of subcutaneous fat were difficult, but it was the muscle beneath that truly tested my strength and the quality of my steel. It was dense and ropey, interwoven with sinew as thick as my finger. Peeling back the layers of decaying flesh was a grim, arduous task. And then I saw it. Amidst the dark, putrefied mass of the creature's internal organs was a splash of synthetic blue. The color was so jarringly out of place, so artificial in that landscape of organic decay, that for a moment, My mind refused to process it. It was fabric. My heart, which had been a steady, nervous drum, hammered against my ribs. My professional detachment shattered, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Using the tip of my knife, I carefully hooked the material, pulling it free from the surrounding gore. It was part of a child's jacket, small and bright blue. The nylon fabric slick and unnervingly clean compared to its surroundings. And there, on the chest, was a cartoon rocket ship embroidered in yellow and red thread. My blood ran cold. The forest, the dead creature, the impossible reality of it all faded into the background. There was only that small piece of blue cloth and the terrible story it was beginning to tell. I kept digging, my movements now frantic. My knife scraped against something hard. I pushed aside a section of the stomach wall and found a small-sized red sneaker, the kind with flashing lights in the heel. It was caked in filth, but the color was unmistakable. It was a size a small child would wear, maybe a 5 or 6-year-old. And then, tangled in the mess of the creature's digestive tract, I found a child's backpack. It was small, shaped like a green dinosaur, its zipper torn open. Its contents had spilled out into the creature's stomach cavity. A half-eaten, sticky bag of gummy dinosaurs, a worn, brown teddy bear, its button eyes staring blankly into the darkness, and a school ID card, sealed in a protective layer of plastic that had kept it mostly intact. I pulled it out, my hand trembling so badly I could barely hold it. I wiped the grime away with my thumb. The smiling, gap-toothed face of a little boy stared up at me, his hair a messy mop of blonde curls. His name was Daniel Miller. The news report from the local station flashed through my mind. He'd gone missing from a campsite at Lost Lake, not 15 miles from here, 2 weeks ago. The search had been called off after 5 days. The official theory was that he had wandered off and succumbed to the elements. I sat back on my heels, the world tilting on its axis, the buzzing of the flies, the stench of death, the weight of the impossible truth crashed down on me. The monster in the clearing was not just a biological marvel, it was a tomb. I stumbled back, my mind reeling, the knife falling from my numb fingers to land with a soft thud in the blood-soaked earth. My legs felt weak, disconnected from my body, and I landed hard on the ground, the impact barely registering. The smiling face on the plastic ID card was burned into my vision. Daniel Miller. The official story, the one the sheriff had delivered to the news cameras with a somber expression, was that the boy had wandered off from his family's tent in the middle of the night. A tragic accident. They had found one of his footprints by the edge of the lake, and that was it. The woods had swallowed him whole. That was the story everyone had accepted, the one that allowed the community to grieve and move on. But this was a horror story, a folk tale given teeth and an insatiable hunger. The creature was not just an animal, it was the monster from a child's nightmare. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the clearing pressing in on me, the stench of death a constant, nauseating reminder of the truth I had uncovered. My mind, which had always been a calm, orderly place, was a storm of conflicting emotions, disbelief, horror, and a profound, soul-deep sorrow for the little boy and the family that would never know what truly happened to him. But beneath it all, a cold resolve began to form. I was the only one who knew. I was the only one who could give that family the truth, no matter how monstrous it was. I got to my feet, my movements stiff and robotic. I gathered what I could, my hands shaking so violently that I had to steady one with the other. The ID card, its plastic surface now smudged with my fingerprints, and something far worse. The small red sneaker, a pathetic mud-caked remnant of a life cut short. A piece of the blue jacket with the rocket ship, a symbol of a journey that had ended in the belly of a beast. I carefully placed them in a clear plastic evidence bag I always carried in my pack for collecting samples, a habit from years of tracking. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. There was no cell service this deep in the woods, no way to call for help or to report the unspeakable thing I had found. I had to get back to my truck, get to the nearest town, and call the sheriff. I took one last look at the dead Sasquatch, its massive form a dark scar on the landscape. It was no longer a scientific marvel or a creature of myth. It was a killer, a murderer. And then I turned and walked away, not looking back. The hike back was a blur, a frantic, desperate flight through a forest that had transformed around me. It was no longer my sanctuary, my home. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The familiar shapes of trees twisting into monstrous forms in my peripheral vision. Every snap of a twig made me spin around, my rifle raised, my heart hammering against my ribs. Was the creature I found the only one? Were there others out here, watching me from the deep, dark woods? The heavy silence that had been unnerving on the way in now felt malevolent. A living thing that was aware of me, that knew the secret I carried. It was the silence of a place that kept its secrets well, a place that had swallowed a little boy and would have kept the truth buried forever if I had not stumbled upon it. I found Buster where I'd left him, pacing anxiously at the edge of the trail. He greeted me with a frantic whimper, pressing against me, his fear a palpable thing. He knew. He had known all along. I did not stop to rest. I pushed on, fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline and dread, Buster trotting close at my heels. It was nearly dark when I reached my truck, the last rays of sunlight painting the sky in bloody streaks of red and orange. The familiar sight of the old Ford should have been a comfort, but it just looked small and vulnerable against the backdrop of the looming forest. I threw my pack and my rifle in the cab and climbed in. My hands fumbling with the keys, I drove like a madman, the tires skidding on the loose gravel of the logging road, the suspension bottoming out in the ruts. I did not care. The only thing that mattered was putting distance between myself and that clearing, between myself and the truth rotting away in the twilight. I finally hit the paved highway and pushed the truck to its limit, the engine whining in protest. The miles flew by, but the image of that little boy's face on the ID card was a ghost in the passenger seat beside me. I finally got a signal on the outskirts of Clark Fork, the small town that served as the last bastion of civilization before the wilderness took over. I saw the bars appear on my phone's screen. 1, then 2. I pulled over to the side of the road, the truck lurching to a stop in a cloud of dust. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, detached, a voice from a world that still made sense. 911, what's your emergency? I took a ragged breath, the words catching in my throat. "My name is Arthur Penn," I said, my voice hoarse, a stranger's voice. "I've found something related to the Daniel Miller case. You need to send a deputy. Now." 2 sets of headlights cut through the twilight, approaching fast. I stayed by my truck, the engine ticking as it cooled, and watched them grow from distant stars to the unmistakable shape of a sheriff's department patrol car. A sense of profound relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. The weight I was carrying was no longer mine alone. The truth was about to be shared, and the wheels of justice, however slow they might turn, would begin to grind. The car pulled up behind my pickup, its headlights pinning me in their harsh, white glare. For a long moment, no one got out. I could see 2 silhouettes through the windshield, the red and blue glow of their console lights painting their faces in shifting colors. Finally, the driver's side door opened, and a man emerged. He was older, with a thick middle and a face that looked like it had been carved from tired stone. The sheriff's insignia on his sleeve identified him as the man in charge. This was Sheriff Thompson. The passenger door opened, and a younger, leaner deputy stepped out, his hand resting near the butt of his pistol in a way that was either habit or nerves. They approached me slowly, their boots crunching on the gravel shoulder, their expressions unreadable in the deepening gloom. The air was cold now, and I could see my breath pluming in front of me. "You, Arthur Penn?" Thompson asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sounded like it came from deep in his chest. I nodded, my throat too dry for words. "I'm the one who called." He stopped a few feet from me, his eyes taking in my disheveled appearance, the dirt on my clothes, the wild look that I knew must be in my eyes. "Dispatch said you had information on the Miller boy." I reached into the cab of my truck and pulled out the clear plastic evidence bag. The contents seemed to glow with a sickening luminescence in the headlights. "I found him," I said, my voice finally returning, though it sounded ragged and broken to my own ears. "Or what's left of him." Thompson took the bag from my outstretched hand, his gaze fixed on its contents. The younger deputy moved closer, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to illuminate the small, pathetic items. The red sneaker, the scrap of blue nylon with its cheerful rocket ship, the plastic-encased ID card. I saw a flicker of something in the young deputy's eyes, shock, maybe even pity. Thompson's face remained a mask. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice flat. And so I did. I told them about the footprint, the unsettling silence of the forest, the overwhelming stench of death. I described the clearing, the 2 ancient cedars, and the impossible creature lying between them. I watched their faces as I spoke, saw the moment the story turned. When I said the word Sasquatch, the young deputy's expression shifted from professional focus to outright disbelief. He shot a quick, uncertain glance at his boss. Thompson did not flinch, but a cynical, weary look settled into the lines around his eyes. It was the look of a man who had heard too many tall tales from drunks and madmen. I knew I was losing them. I pushed on, my voice growing more urgent, describing the swollen abdomen, the grim task of cutting it open, and the final, horrific discovery of the items in the bag they now held. When I finished, The silence on the side of the highway was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the patrol car's engine. "A Bigfoot," Thompson finally said, the words heavy with skepticism. "You're telling me a Bigfoot ate that boy?" "I am telling you what I saw," I insisted, my frustration mounting. "I am telling you the truth. The evidence is right there in your hand." Thompson looked down at the bag again, then back at me. He held my gaze for a long time, as if trying to see past the wild story to the man telling it. I had known him for years, not well, but we had crossed paths. He knew I was not a man given to flights of fancy. He knew my reputation. "Wait here," he said, his tone clipped and official. He and the other deputy walked back to their patrol car, leaving me standing alone in the cold and the dark. They got inside, and I watched as they spoke, their faces illuminated by the dashboard lights. Thompson was on the radio, his voice a muffled, urgent squawk that I could not make out. The conversation went on for what felt like an eternity. I paced back and forth, the adrenaline from my flight through the woods long gone, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and a growing sense of dread. Something was wrong. This was not how it was supposed to go. They should have been calling for backup, for a forensics team, for the coroner. But the conversation on the radio was too long, too quiet. Finally, the car doors opened again. They emerged from the vehicle, but they were different now. The professional detachment, even the skepticism, was gone. It had been replaced by something hard and cold, something hostile. They moved with a new purpose, a grim authority that set every nerve in my body on edge. "Arthur Penn," Thompson said, and his voice had changed. The weary rumble was gone, replaced by a sharp, metallic edge. "We have a report of an illegal kill in this area. A large, protected animal, specifically a grizzly bear, out of season." My blood turned to ice. A wave of confusion and disbelief washed over me, so strong I felt dizzy. What are you talking about? I did not kill anything. I found it. It was already dead." The young deputy, his face now a stony, expressionless mask, stepped past me and opened the door to my truck. He reached in and pulled out my Winchester, handling it with a cold efficiency that made my stomach clench. "We're going to have to confiscate your weapon," Thompson said, his eyes like chips of flint. "And this evidence." He held up the bag containing the last remnants of Daniel Miller's life. "There's a logging company, a very important, very wealthy company, that has a permit to do some geological surveying up that old road. They're looking to start a major operation on something that would bring a lot of money into this county. They would not take kindly to stories about monsters in the woods scaring off their investors." The pieces clicked into place, each one a cold, hard shard of a truth, more monstrous than the creature in the clearing. I stared at him, dumbfounded. The words caught in my throat. "You're burying this," I finally managed to say, my voice a whisper. "You're covering it up. What about that little boy? What about his family? They deserve to know the truth." Thompson took a step closer, invading my personal space, his face just inches from mine. The smell of stale coffee was on his breath. "His family has their story," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "They believe their son got lost in the woods. It's a tragedy, but it's a tragedy they can understand. It lets them sleep at night. You want to tell them that their boy was eaten by a monster? You think that's a kindness? He did not wait for an answer. "You're going to go home, Mr. Penn? You're going to get in your truck, drive home, and you're going to forget everything you saw today. You went on a routine scouting trip, and you saw nothing. Because if you do not, I promise you, the only monster people in this county will be talking about is the respected local hunter who was suddenly charged with poaching a protected grizzly and then fabricated a crazy, headline-grabbing story to cover his tracks. Do you understand me?" He did not need to say more. I saw the rest of the story laid out before me. The planted evidence, the coerced testimony, the quiet disgrace that would swallow my life whole. I was one man, a man who lived on the edge of the world. I was nothing against the weight of money and power. I looked from Thompson's hard, unyielding face to the young deputy standing by my truck, holding my father's rifle as if it were a piece of trash. I looked at the evidence bag in the sheriff's hand, the last testament of a lost child, about to be filed away in a deep, dark hole where the truth went to die. I gave a slow, defeated nod. Thompson stared at me for another moment, then seemed satisfied. He turned without another word and walked back to his patrol car. The young deputy placed my rifle in their trunk, slammed it shut, and got into the passenger seat. They pulled away, their red tail lights shrinking in the distance until they were swallowed by the night, leaving me standing alone on the side of the highway in the crushing darkness. The truth, a toxic, radioactive secret, burning a hole in my soul.